Gaza is now described as a graveyard for children, and my next guest knows firsthand the heartbreak of losing a child. Robi Damelin's son, David, was killed by a Palestinian sniper in 2002 during his mandatory military service in the Israeli Defense Forces. David was 28. That same year, Layla, Alsheikh's 6-month-old son, Kusei, died of complications after a tear gas attack by Israeli forces on her village. Now, through the organization, the Parent Circle, Families Forum, the two mothers are sharing their stories of grief while calling for reconciliation. Layla, Alsheikh, and Robi Damelin are here with me in our Washington studio, and we're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you.
Robi, let me begin with you. You and I spoke November of last year, not long after the October 7th attacks. 14 months later, some 44,000 people in Gaza have died. Gaza pretty much decimated, catastrophic humanitarian conditions, and hostages are still being held. When we spoke a year ago, did you think this crisis would drag on this long?
I think nobody knew what was going to happen, but I certainly never thought that we would still be in the war, because we are in war, and that I had a lot of time to contemplate why. You know, I think if you understand something, it changes everything. And I tried to understand how the Israeli army took this revenge now. And I thought to myself, they lost the war on October the 7th. And for Israel, you know, this great supposed army, that was very humiliating. And then they couldn't rescue the hostages like they did in Entebbe with this great heroic way of rescuing. So it leads you to the fact that people are looking for revenge, because when you are humiliated, you want revenge. And I think about the kids in Gaza. You know, I went to a kibbutz down next to the Gaza border called Nir Oz, which really lost, I think, 1/3 of the whole population. Because I think when you talk, you need to have the testimonial of seeing. So many people all over the world have become great experts on the Middle East while knowing not very much, to say the least. And so it was one of the worst days that I have spent, because I couldn't believe the damage and the sadness and the little shoes outside houses and bicycles thrown and the smell. And then I thought about, how could this happen? You know, it's like tied also to the thing about how this man killed my son. What happened? What could bring somebody to do the acts that happened on the 7th of October? I had a lot of time to contemplate. And I think if you grew up in Gaza and you were a small kid, you know, and every 2 years there's a war, and you don't have a shelter, and you watch your mother running with your siblings, and you don't have freedom of movement, and you don't have hope, and you don't have anything. So what kind of adult will you grow up to be?
Well, that was going to be my next question, and I was going to ask Layla this. So much concern that this unfolding nightmare in Gaza, and we're going to talk about the West Bank in a moment first, will radicalize a new generation of young people who have lost so much. Their homes, their schools, their mosques, their healthcare centers. They've also lost hope. So when you've lost everything, including hope, and you have nothing to lose, you grow up wanting to take revenge. Layla, your take on it.
I don't know, because it's totally different from person to person. Even some people, even after they lost everything, I think maybe they still have hope because they believe in God. And when you believe in God, seriously, I think whatever happened to you, there is still hope that God will finish this someday, somehow. We didn't know how, we didn't know when. And this is what happened to me. Mm-hmm. Like when I lost my son, I didn't think to take revenge, because revenge for me will never bring my son back, but it will bring another innocent family to this circle of violence. And I will never, ever let anyone be in that situation, because I know how much that hurt.
talk to me about if there was a moment for both of you where you said to yourself, enough is enough, enough violence, enough killing, enough division, enough hate. It is time to talk about understanding one another. It's time to have empathy towards the unimaginable suffering of other people. Robi, when did that moment come for you? Because of all the heartbreak and loss that you have endured, you still have the courage and resilience to say, yes, we endured the worst nightmare, and here we are talking about empathy, the future, and hope.
You know, it's quite extraordinary because I think my reaction on the 7th of October was very similar to when David was killed. It was this, I've got to change the world overnight. So I found myself traveling back and forth because I think the message that we give of reconciliation and of not importing our conflict into your country is universal. And so I just wanted to change the world overnight. Of course, that's a bit ambitious, I would think. But what happened is that I have this drive, you know. I think I can cope with grief by working. And I work 24 hours a day because we came here to do something which I hope you will ask me at some point.
Yes, I will.
Because we're not here just for fun. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think that I knew from the beginning, I was horrified. And when I met the Pauline family, they were a family who are quite leftist in view, and they lost, their son was a hostage. She spoke at the Democratic Convention here. And I met them 2 weeks after their son was kidnapped. This kid was shot in the arm and kidnapped. And I thought, this is the human consequence of this madness. I saw a little boy standing in Gaza holding onto his cat. And Palestinians love cats. And they're allowed in mosques, something I learned only recently. And this little boy wouldn't go to the south with his parents if they wouldn't take his cat. So they agreed eventually, and he went with his cat. And then I saw this little girl hostage coming out when she was released, holding onto a dog called Bella. And that's the human consequence of this madness that people don't see, because if you will ask all the great experts all over the world, can you give me the name of one child that was killed in Gaza or one child that was killed in Israel? I don't think they could. And that's the sadness, that people don't understand the sanctity of human life.
What's been the reaction to your message of peace and reconciliation? I know you have probably both gotten a lot of support, but also backlash. Robi, the way you're looking at me, I think you've also gotten a lot of criticism from within the Israeli community, within the government, I'm sure, as well.
Well, the government, I mean, that's clear. But also I wrote an op-ed where I said you must free the man who killed David if that will bring back a hostage. So you can imagine that didn't put me on the top of the popularity list, but I think Layla can be more eloquent about that.
Yeah, and not just reaction to you guys spreading that message, but also the fact that you two are so close. And what do people say, and what are you hearing? What's been the reaction?
For our relationship, everyone will say it's okay, like, to have a human relationship, because it's like just mothers. We don't do other things, like. But if we want to talk about our projects or our work in the organization, there's many people against that. And one of them were my oldest daughter. When she knows that I become member in the forum, she asked me many times to quit because she's the oldest. She knows the whole story of her brother. And it was so difficult for me.
Yeah, what did you tell her?
At first, I couldn't tell her anything. Until one day, we have Memorial Day every year to remember our beloved ones from both sides, and to give or spread a message of people around the world. If we are the people who suffered daily from this occupation, could stand side by side together, try to put our effort together to make it change, everything could be possible. So I was one of the speakers. So when I returned back home, I was really terrified because I don't know her reaction. But then she came forward and she said to me, just now I understand. And I realized, sorry, why you did this, and I'm so proud of you.
Oh.
And that was one of the most important points in my whole journey, because if my children could understand that, everything will be easier for me.
Yeah, if you can change one mind, there's hope that you can change many, many
Yeah,
other minds.
But even sometimes it's difficult to deal with your own beloved ones.
Of course, of course.
It's easy to speak to other people about that, but for your own family, this is much more difficult.
I have to ask you about the situation in the West Bank. We've been so focused on the disaster unfolding in Gaza, but settler violence has soared dramatically. Palestinians are being forced out of their homes. What is life like for someone like yourself in the West Bank?
Unfortunately, the situation at the West Bank, it's so difficult. How much I try to explain, I will never explain everything. Like since the 7th of October until today, we're still under closure. We don't have a freedom to move. All the people who work inside Israel, they lost their jobs. So the economic situation become in the lowest point now. Most of the children couldn't go to school for many months, and if they are lucky to do that, they could go for one day. We didn't have shelters. There's many rockets fell down in the West Bank because the rocket will never recognize if you're Palestinian or Israeli. And the worst part is the settlers. They attack the Palestinian every day.
And they feel rather emboldened right now, don't
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially because the Israeli soldiers protected them, sometimes encouraged them, so they feel free to do everything that they want, and no one asked them.
Do you both still believe a two-state solution is possible? Robi?
You know, I don't really care. What I care very much about is that both sides agree, and that it's not forced by one side onto the other. We're not a political organization. Everybody that's working for peace is a political person, but we're not affiliated to any political parties. And what we really want is to create a framework for a reconciliation process to be an integral part of any future political peace agreement. Because we've signed stuff on the White House lawn, and you've seen what happened. If we don't get the public to be aware that there has to be some form of reconciliation, then all we can hope for at best is a ceasefire. And so this is all the work that we do on the ground with the summer camps, the young ambassadors, the women's group. We have a very, very active women's group, which makes me very happy. I think it's time for women to come to the table. We run, you know, and even throughout the war, we've continued to do our work with this terrible closure, with people out of their homes in the north, in the south, all over. Nobody knows exactly what the situation is in the West Bank, but I can tell you that the domestic violence, you know, anybody who gets stuck at home, it's also happening in Israel with families that haven't been home. On the Lebanese border, for instance, there are 60,000 families. And so they're stuck at home. And you know what happens when people are stuck at home. And the economic situation in the West Bank is appalling. And so what do people expect? So if we don't change that situation, for me, the West Bank is a cauldron just waiting to blow up. And people cannot, the problem is that most people don't know what's going on there or don't want to know. And we have to make people aware, and we have to make change.
And I think that's one of the reasons you're traveling, you're here in the United States to spread that message, to raise awareness about what's happening in Gaza, in the West Bank, the unimaginable suffering that's going on. Tell me exactly what your mission is from this trip here in the United States.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. At the beginning of the war, we had endless, and up to today, endless requests for dialogue meetings like we do for people who are desperate for hope. Not only synagogues, churches, mosques, schools, campuses, of course campuses all over the country, Fortune companies, the World Bank. So we couldn't possibly supply or answer and do all these meetings, not even on Zoom. So fortunately, we have a wonderful relationship with Georgetown University. For many, many years, they've been our mentors. And we came to Georgetown last January, and we met with the president, and we gave a dialogue meeting to the students, and they suddenly realized how effective this message is for their students. And we asked if they could help us create an online program, an education program, that we could give to all the campuses and to anybody who needs it. And so it's 3 dialogue meetings, as if you had us in the room and 2 other couples of Palestinians and Israelis with questions and answers. And Georgetown helped us prepare a manual, because most people are frightened to even say anything about the situation. We were at the United Nations school in New York like 3 days ago, and the teachers were frightened to even talk to each other about the situation.
Why?
Because they think that, you know, somebody will be upset and maybe they're pro-Israel or pro-Palestine.
Right.
And it's absurd, you know. So this gives guidance to somebody. They don't have to be a facilitator on how to run the program. And we ran the program for the teachers there and for their children and for the children and for the parents, 3 separate sessions. We also went to Texas, believe it or not.
Texas.
To the Teachers Union Federation, and there were 3,000 teachers there, and they endorsed this program. And then we launched it at NYU 2 months ago, and that was extraordinary. And now we are working together with NYU. They are sending a group of young Palestinians and Israelis from our group to Prague, and they're going to send some students from NYU who speak Arabic and Hebrew to be together with the kids and some professors. So it's growing and growing. Wherever we go, they want this program in Germany, they want it in Italy, because people are desperate. They don't know what to do.
Yeah. What about political leaders? Layla, I mean, they are the ones who are making the decisions. I mean, it's wonderful to have these relationships with college campuses, with activists, with like-minded people like yourself, to raise awareness through the media, people like myself. But at the end of the day, will that really, truly change anything in terms of policy and the situation on the ground, Layla?
Of course, when the politicians decided to have war or even peace, they will never came to ask both of us, what's your opinion? We know that when that will happen, they will have the authority to do that. But we didn't wait until that to happen, because we believe in reconciliation. Reconciliation have a big power to bring people, because when we have that agreement, Oslo agreement, everyone was shocked, because one day we woke up and they started to talk about peace. No one was ready for that, and because of that, it's failed now. And we believe that reconciliation is so important to bring people. When our leaders have time to have peace, they will be ready to accept it.
You know, I was talking to someone about my interview with both of you, your message, what you're trying to accomplish. Reconciliation, dialogue is basically a much better alternative to what we're seeing right now. And she turned around to me and say, oh, it's so much easier said than done, and it's not that simple, because so many people don't believe in Israel's right to exist. And I asked her, do you believe that what's happening is going to make Israel safer, this military campaign? And she said yes. And that is the problem. That is the obstacle. There are many people who still support what's happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, in the West Bank. So what is your message to those people? Robi.
Okay, you know, there were so many demonstrations on all the universities, it's on the campuses. It's starting up again now. And I have a message for all of those people. It's wonderful that Palestine is on the map after so many years. But why not take all that extraordinary energy and support NGOs on the ground, Palestinian and Israeli, not necessarily us, but things like Combatants for Peace, Breaking the Silence, Women Wage Peace. There's so many of them who desperately need support. I'm not only talking about money, I mean moral support as well. Then you would make a difference in my life and Layla's life. And just by saying I'm pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, you just import our conflict into your country and create hatred between Jews and Muslims. So what I would suggest, if you can't do something, be a part of the solution, please just leave us alone.
Layla, your final thoughts on this, your message to Americans, to people around the world watching this program right now.
I think I will say the same, because if you pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, how this will help us to improve our life or to even have a solution. What we want is to pro-peace. This is what we want, and this is what we need really right now, because we have enough. How many other people should we lose until we got that agreement? And we don't want ceasefire, we want a solution, because if we have just a ceasefire, then after a few months or a second year, we will have another war. And it's time to say enough is enough.